Hey everyone. Tonight we don't start in England, nor in the comfort of barracks or loading docks. Instead, we begin inside a landing craft, pitching violently on black water. The ramp is still up, the air thick with the acrid stench of vomit, diesel, and pure, primal fear. You're packed shoulder to shoulder with men who barely whisper, each breath a silent prayer. Somewhere ahead is France. Somewhere ahead lies the Atlantic Wall. When that ramp falls, you will have seconds to live. MG-42s are waiting, dug into the cliffs, their barrels pre-aimed at the very sand you're about to step onto. You were told the naval guns would silence them. They didn't. You were told the bombs would crush the bunkers. They didn't. This is Omaha Beach. Not as a triumph, but as a slaughterhouse. Tonight, we'll walk through it step by agonizing step, scream by deafening scream. But before we plunge into that hell, take a moment to like and subscribe, and tell me what time it is where you're watching. Now, let's go back to that landing craft. You're still on that landing craft, the metal groaning beneath you, a low, metallic moan echoing your own rising dread. Then, the ramp drops. Not with a gentle lowering, but with a sudden, violent clang that rips through the air, a jarring, final chord in the symphony of your journey. It's an instant, brutal invitation to a world utterly unlike any you've ever known. Outside, the world explodes into a cacophony of sound and fury. The MG-42s, those terrifying German machine guns, aren't just waiting. They're singing, a high-pitched, tearing symphony of death, a relentless, serrated edge cutting through the very fabric of the morning. You see at the impossible speed of bullets stitching through the air, through the water, through the men in front of you. It's a blur of motion, a terrifying, unstoppable force. The freezing surf. Just moments ago, a dark, indifferent expanse. Now flecks with crimson. Then it's stained. Then fully red. A horrifying, watercolor painting spreading across the sand with alarming speed, mirroring the rapid departure of life. Men, who just seconds ago took a final, desperate breath, sink beneath the waves. They're pulled down not just by the churning currents, but by the impossible, suffocating weight of their gear around 110 pounds of rifles, grenades, shovels, rations, and the cruel irony of those useless life vests, which only serve to hold them upright as stationary, agonizing targets for a brief, horrifying moment before they succumb. That seawall, the promised haven you'd hoped to reach, becomes an impossible, grotesque barrier. Before your eyes, it transforms into a grim, shifting mound of human bodies, piled one upon another, a horrifying, macabre cover. Each fallen man, a desperate, silent shield for the next. For you, shouts begin, piercing the constant, concussive thunder of devastating 88mm shells that land with shocking impact, rattling your very bones, shaking the sand beneath your feet. Medic, medic, it's a primal scream, a desperate, broken prayer, echoing across the open expanse, lost in the overwhelming din. You feel a presence beside you, a sudden, heavy weight. You turn, a shape, a friend, a comrade whose face you knew just moments ago, whose jokes had offered fleeting comfort, now collapses. His eyes, wide, unseeing, are fixed on nothing but the empty sky. His mouth, open in a silent, desperate gasp, is filled with wet, dark sand, a final, bitter, suffocating meal. This isn't the battle you were trained for. Not the heroic charge of the movies. Not the distant, romanticized vision of war. This is a giant, churning meat grinder, an indiscriminate devourer of flesh and hope. Every second is a gamble, every breath, a miracle you're not sure you deserve. Can you, in this moment, possibly survive? It's not rhetorical. It's a desperate, burning ember in the pit of your stomach. You press forward, one heavy foot after another, each step a testament to a will you didn't know you possessed, a slow, agonizing crawl towards a future that may not exist. The sand shifts beneath you, cold, wet, clinging to your boots, making every movement a Herculean effort. The screams, the explosions, the distant, relentless thump, thump, thump of the heavy guns. They merge into a single, overwhelming, deafening roar. You are here, in the heart of the maelstrom, and all you can do is breathe and move and hope. A profound, almost surreal calm tries to settle over the sheer terror. A strange disconnect where your body functions even as your mind reels. The only path forward is through. You try to focus on the small things, the crunch of sand, the taste of salt on your lips, the frantic beat of your own heart. Anything just to keep moving, just to exist for one more breath. The air is thick with the metallic tang of blood, the acrid smell of burnt powder, and the bitter scent of fear, all merging into an unforgettable, horrifying perfume of war. Still, you push on, one step at a time, into the heart of the storm. But before this moment, before the ramp fell and the world turned red, there was a night, a quiet stillness across the channel, in England. Let's rewind, just for a moment, to that brief, deceptive calm. You're in the barracks, the air thick with a silence heavier than any spoken word. Hundreds of men, just like you, hunched over paper, the scratching of pens the only sound. They're scribbling final letters home, trying to find words of comfort, words of love, words that might bridge the vast, terrifying chasm of uncertainty. What do you write when you don't know if you'll see the dawn? What do you say when farewell hangs unspoken in the air? Outside, by the harbor, the grim reality is already stark. Body bags, unyielding, stacked in neat, chilling rows, stark reminders of tomorrow's cost. A silent testament to the scale of the undertaking. A dark prophecy whispered on the wind. General Eisenhower's order, a solemn pronouncement, echoes in your memory. The eyes of the world are upon you. It feels less like encouragement and more like a hushed farewell. A blessing cast into the abyss. You try to push it from your mind, but the words cling like a damp fog. As you move through the English villages, children line the streets, waving goodbye. Their innocent faces a poignant contrast to the grim resolve in the soldiers' eyes. One small boy, his voice impossibly clear in the sudden quiet, shouts, "You won't come back," before being swiftly pulled away. The words, though from a child, strike a chilling chord, a truth everyone felt, but no one dared to voice. It hangs in the air, a cold, undeniable fact. You tighten the chin strap of your helmet, cold metal against your jaw, and swallow hard. No one speaks of the fear. Instead, a quiet determination settles. a shared unspoken understanding. Step by step, columns of men, a silent, resolute tide, vanish into the gaping, steel maw of the landing ships. Each man carries not just his heavy pack, but the collective weight of hope, fear, and a terrifying duty. The metal doors close behind you with a thud, sealing you in. The world outside fades, leaving only the sound of engines stirring and the rhythmic pulse of the sea. The barracks, now empty, hold only the ghosts of letters half written and dreams suspended in time. A quiet dread, a deep, pervasive knowing, settles in the belly of the ship. The air grows colder, and the last vestiges of a familiar world recede into the fading twilight, leaving you adrift in a sea of unspoken anxieties. On board, the confinement is immediate, absolute. You're crammed shoulder to shoulder, a mass of humanity in a steel box, the air quickly growing stale and warm. The rhythmic pitching and rolling of the ship begin almost immediately, a ceaseless, disorienting motion that quickly takes its toll. The stench, at first subtle, then overpowering, begins to rise, the sickly sweet smell of seasickness, of men vomiting into their boots onto the decks, a pervasive odor that mixes with the acrid fumes of diesel fuel and the sharp tang of salt water. It's a sensory nightmare, a cruel prelude to the greater terrors ahead. Your heavy pack, initially a manageable burden, now crushes your shoulders with relentless pressure. A solid block of weight, around 110 pounds, a constant physical reminder of what you carry into the unknown. Inside, carefully organized, are your Lee Enfield rifle, cold and comforting, grenades, compact and deadly, a sturdy shovel for digging and defense, essential rations, now tasting like cardboard in your dry mouth, and, with grim irony, those useless life vests, designed to save you from drowning, but only serving as a buoyant target, a stark reminder of the impossibility of true safety. As the hours drag on, the memory of Exercise Tiger, a training disaster just weeks prior that claimed the lives of 749 men, hangs heavy in the air, a haunting ghost, a whispered warning in every creak of the hull, every sway of the ship. You recall the sheer chaos German E-boats striking, desperate cries in the dark water, the thought of it, the cold, crushing reality of that tragic prelude, sends a shiver through you that has nothing to do with the chill of the sea. Some men around you whisper prayers, lips moving silently, eyes closed in supplication. Others simply shut their eyes, hands trembling imperceptibly on the cold, hard stock of their rifles, each lost in his own private world of fear and silent courage. The darkness outside the portholes, when you can glimpse it, is absolute, reflecting the profound uncertainty within. Dawn has not yet come, but everyone aboard, every man crammed into this metal coffin, knows with chilling certainty that the morning will be painted in blood. The quiet hum of the engines, the sloshing of the waves, the occasional muffled cough, all weave into a somber symphony of waiting. Each second ticks by, stretching into an eternity, bringing you closer to a fate unknown, a destiny that will forever alter the landscape of your life, or end it. The cold metal beneath your hand, the distant thrum of the screws. All these sensations merge into a single, overwhelming awareness you are now utterly committed to the impending storm. As the night slowly yields to the first faint hints of dawn, a new, more profound tremor ripples through the ship, through you. It's no longer just the gentle rocking of waves, but a deep, resonant rumble vibrating through the steel hull, through your very bones. A sound promising nothing less than utter destruction. Far ahead, across the inky darkness of the Channel, 200 Allied warships, a mighty armada stretching to the horizon, unleash their fury. Their guns roar, a coordinated symphony of thunder that shakes the French coast like an earthquake, a seismic tremor engulfing your vessel. You imagine massive, deadly shells arcing through the pre-dawn sky, screaming down onto the distant shore. Then come the bombs, raining from the heavens, an astonishing 76,000 tons of explosives unleashed, designed to obliterate German defenses, to pave the way. Yet, even as concussions buffet your ship, a chilling realization settles many formidable German bunkers, dug deep and reinforced with thick concrete, remain untouched, defiant, ready. The crushing weight of that knowledge is almost unbearable. Above, unseen in the lingering darkness, paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st U.S. Airborne Divisions, along with their British counterparts, have already leaped into the abyss. You picture them, dark shapes against a darker sky, descending into the unknown. Many, you know, will drown in the flooded fields below, their heavy equipment dragging them beneath the surface. A silent, terrible fate unfolding even before the first shot is fired on the beaches. Their sacrifice, you understand, is already part of this unfolding tragedy. On your landing craft, every explosion, every distant boom of a naval gun, every shudder of the land, resonates through the metal deck, through your core. You feel it in your teeth, in your stomach, a constant, low-frequency hum of impending doom. The air in the cramped space thickens with the vibrations, with the unspoken dread. A soldier next to you, face pale and etched with fear, leans close and whispers, barely audible above the distant din, "If the bunkers stand, we'll pay in blood." The words are simple, stark, utterly terrifying. Then, as the first faint smudges of light begin to paint the eastern sky, cutting through the smoke and haze, a sharp, clear order slices through the rumbling. It comes over the crackling intercom, a voice of authority piercing the collective trance. 10 minutes, prepare to land. The world narrows to this moment. 10 minutes until the steel ramp slams down. 10 minutes until the true storm breaks. 10 minutes to gather every shred of courage, to swallow the fear, to prepare for a reckoning that will define the rest of your life, or end it. The craft's engines roar to a higher pitch, turning with a new, urgent purpose, pulling you inexorably towards the shore, towards destiny. As the landing crafts churn closer to the shore, the vast, terrifying tapestry of D-Day unfurls across the long coastline. Each beach a different canvas, painted with varying shades of hope and despair. Though your immediate world is the chaos of Omaha, the stories of the other beaches will ripple through the days and weeks to come, a testament to the varied fates that awaited the Allied forces. At Utah, fortune for some sons, for once, seemed to favor the brave. Men found a kinder shore, German defenses less prepared, naval bombardment more effective. Casualties were lighter, the landing smoother, a relative stride ashore compared to the nightmare unfolding elsewhere. Whispers would tell of men wading through shallow water, quickly establishing a foothold. A distant, almost alien concept compared to the hell you are enduring. On gold and sword beaches, British troops pushed inland with resolute determination. Their advance, though met with fierce resistance, carved out footholds through coastal towns, engaging in desperate house-to-house combat. A different kind of terror, but one where progress, however slow, was tangible. Juno Beach, however, told a different, more tragic tale for the Canadians. They were met with a storm of machine gun fire, a murderous hail that shredded their ranks even before they reached the relative cover of the seawall. Entire companies seemed to vanish, swallowed by the unforgiving sands and icy waves. A slaughter, a devastating loss etched into the memory of a nation. And then, there is Omaha, your beach, the nightmare that continues to unfold around you. 2,000 men, lost in just a few agonizing hours. The surf, a merciless tide, clogged with bodies, a grim testament to the sheer, unyielding brutality of German defenses. You see them, floating, tumbling, a ghastly harvest of the sea, each one a life extinguished, a story unfinished. The sheer scale of devastation here is beyond comprehension. Further down the coast, at Pointe du Hoc, American Rangers faced an impossible task. Scaling sheer cliffs, ropes thrown against jagged rock, clawing upwards under a brutal barrage of MG-42 fire. Many were cut down, their bodies falling hundreds of feet into the churning sea below. A desperate, heroic, agonizingly costly endeavor. Yet, even amidst this widespread carnage, moments of almost surreal beauty and defiance emerged. On Sword Beach, amid the smoke and deafening chaos, a lone figure stood out. Bill Millen, a Scottish bagpiper, walked along the shore, kilt swaying, his bagpipes echoing a haunting, defiant music over the battlefield. His melody, a stark contrast to the rattle of machine guns and the roar of artillery, was a testament to the human spirit. A strange, beautiful sound rising above the din of destruction. A moment of fragile, almost dreamlike grace in a landscape of unmitigated horror. Each beach, then, was a destiny, a cruel lottery of fate. Some astride a shore, others a slaughterhouse. And you are here, bearing witness, living through the impossible, one breath at a time. The minutes on Omaha Beach stretched into an eternity, each second a desperate fight for survival. The chaos was absolute, a maelstrom of sound and fury threatening to consume you whole. Yet, amidst this unholy din, the medics, those angels in the heart of hell, crawled through the sand. Their arms, already slick with the blood of others, moved with frantic urgency, patching men under the relentless, tearing fire. You see them, ignoring their own safety, a beacon of selfless courage in a landscape of despair. Their voices hoarse, movements precise, faces grim with determination. The wounded lay everywhere, their cries mingling with the roar of explosions and the rat-a-tat of machine guns. And the horrifying truth, to find any semblance of cover, these men, broken and bleeding, often had to be dragged toward the very German guns that had brought them down. It was against every natural instinct, a brutal calculus of survival, pulling comrades closer to the source of their agony, simply to gain a few precious moments of respite behind the slight rise of the shingle, or the dubious shelter of a fallen comrade. The sand itself seemed alive, shifting with the impact of bullets, churning with the tide, a treacherous accomplice to the enemy. You witness unimaginable resilience, limbs blown off, bodies shattered. Yet men, with what strength remained, still squeezed triggers, still fought with whatever piece of themselves was left. Their eyes, though filled with pain, held a desperate, burning fire, a primal refusal to surrender. The seawall, that grim barrier, became more than just a place of shelter. It transformed into a grotesque barricade, a composite of twisted steel, shattered stone, and human remains, a macabre testament to the sheer weight of fire poured upon the beach, a monument to the cost of every inch gained. Cries of mother ripped through the air, primal, heart-wrenching sounds cutting through the constant, rattling bursts of machine gun fire. These weren't the cries of soldiers, but of sons, reverting to the most fundamental bond in their final, agonizing moments. The sounds carried on the wind, echoing across the deadly expanse, a haunting symphony of human suffering. And then there were those who, in a desperate, final act of self-preservation, stripped off their heavy gear, shedding the burdens that would drown them, the equipment that had become a target. They ran, half naked, through the torrent of fire, through the relentless spray of bullets, propelled by a singular, desperate will to live another minute, another second. Their forms, vulnerable and exposed, a stark, raw image of human desperation against overwhelming odds. Time, on Omaha Beach, no longer moved in hours or minutes. It moved only in desperate, fleeting seconds. Each breath, a victory. Each flicker of life, a miracle. The sheer, overwhelming force of the experience was such that your mind struggled to process it, reducing everything to raw instinct, to a primal drive to simply endure. The air vibrated with sorrow and terror, a relentless assault on the senses. And yet, somehow, you continue to move, one agonizing step after another. Even as the beachhead was slowly, painfully secured, the promise of safety beyond the blood-soaked sands proved a cruel illusion. What awaited you and your comrades was not open terrain, but a new, more insidious enemy, the Bocage. Imagine a landscape sculpted by centuries of farming, now transformed by war into a defender's paradise. A dense, claustrophobic labyrinth of hedgerows. These weren't mere garden hedges. They were ancient, formidable barriers of earth and tangled roots, often 10 to 20 feet tall, thick with decades of growth, forming natural, impenetrable walls around every field, every pasture. They turned the countryside into a series of small, deadly arenas, each a potential trap. Within this verdant, deceptive landscape, the Germans had crafted a truly horrifying defense. Their bouncing Betty mines, insidious devices, lay hidden beneath the soft earth. You learned to fear them, the sound of a small click. Then the sickening realization as they leaped waist-high before detonating, shredding flesh with hundreds of steel ball bearings. The air, once filled with birdsong, was now punctuated by distant, chilling explosions, a constant reminder of the unseen dangers lurking beneath your feet. Snipers were everywhere, lurking in the thickets, masters of concealment. One shot, often from an unseen position, meant one corpse. A rustle of leaves, a sudden glint of light, a shifting shadow. Every small detail became a potential harbinger of death. Moving through this terrain was like walking a tightrope, every step fraught with peril, every open space a potential killing ground. You learned to move low, to scan every inch of the tangled foliage, your senses heightened to an unbearable degree. Every farm gate, every winding path, every innocent-looking patch of earth was pre-zeroed with mortars and machine gun nests. The Germans knew this land intimately, and they had turned it into a complex web of interlocking fire zones. You couldn't simply walk through. Every patch of earth had to be paid for in blood, inch by agonizing inch. The advance became a slow, grinding crawl, a battle fought with shovels and grenades as much as with rifles. The Americans, with characteristic ingenuity, soon adapted. Engineers began welding rhino tusks, sharp, heavy blades, onto the front of tanks, turning them into formidable hedgerow smashers. These modified tanks could tear through the thick earth and roots, creating openings. But even this progress was agonizingly slow, measured in mere yards, sometimes even feet. A campaign optimistically projected to last for days, bogged down into weeks of misery, constant tension, brutal, close-quarters combat. The gentle rhythm of the countryside, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustling of leaves, all became a terrifying backdrop to relentless, intimate violence. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant gunfire, created a pervasive sense of unease. And you, moving through it all, wondered if this labyrinth would ever truly yield its secrets, or if you would be forever lost within its deadly embrace. Just when the relentless grind of the Bocage seemed to settle into an unbearable routine, the very ground beneath your feet would suddenly vibrate with a deeper, more ominous tremor. From out of the tree lines, from the hidden depths of ancient villages, panzer tanks would roar into view. These weren't broken remnants of a retreating army, but powerful, armored beasts, their engines a thunderous growl, their long barrels aimed straight at your lines, at you. The sight of them, massive and implacable, could freeze the blood in your veins. You'd feel the cold grip of panic, the sudden, overwhelming certainty that this was the end. Your hands would fumble with ammo, shaking uncontrollably as you tried to load a fresh clip into your rifle. The sheer, terrifying vulnerability of being a man against steel, against the power of these machines, was absolute. The clatter of their tracks, the high-pitched whine of their turrets turning, the sudden, sharp crack of their main guns firing, all coalesced into a symphony of terror. You'd watch as their shells tore through the air, impacting with devastating force, kicking up plumes of earth and shrapnel. Then, just as despair threatened to consume everything, a new sound, a sound of salvation, would rip through the sky. Allied artillery, meticulously coordinated, would descend with a deafening roar, saturating the area around the attacking tanks. Simultaneously, the sleek, terrifying shapes of Typhoon fighter bombers would scream down from above, their engines a banshee wail. They unleashed rockets and bombs, turning the formidable panzers into burning wrecks, grotesque monuments of twisted steel and consuming fire. The air would suddenly be thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel and scorched metal, a stark, brutal perfume of destruction. Germany's one last, desperate chance to throw the Allies back into the sea, to reclaim the beaches, would die in those flames, in the exploding ammunition, in the cries of their crews. The sheer, overwhelming power of Allied air superiority and artillery would prove decisive. You, a survivor, would watch from a distance, or from the relative safety of a foxhole, as black smoke spiraled upwards, thick and oily, into the bruised Normandy sky. You knew that thousands of comrades, on both sides, had already paid the ultimate price for this brutal exchange. Each burning tank was a testament to the lives lost, to the incredible, horrific cost of warfare. That night, as darkness again fell over the battlefields, the Normandy horizon would glow red, a macabre aurora borealis cast by the burning panzers. The flames, licking hungrily at the night sky, illuminated the stark, brutal reality of the struggle. The constant rumbling of distant guns, the flickering light, the smell of cordite and burning metal. It all combined to form an unforgettable tableau of war's harsh face. You'd lie awake, listening to the sounds, seeing the distant glow, knowing that this was a moment of pivotal change, a hard-won victory etched in fire and steel, paid for with an unimaginable price. And as the night wore on, the images of the burning machines, the echoes of their final roars, would replay themselves in the dark theater of your mind, a haunting reminder of the immense power and destruction unleashed. As darkness finally fell, a profound stillness, a deceptive quiet, would attempt to settle over the shattered landscape. But it was a fragile peace, easily broken. The beaches, though shrouded in night, still glowed with an eerie, intermittent light. Flares, launched periodically, cast a momentary, stark illumination over burning wreckage, scattered equipment, the terrible, silent forms amidst the sand and shingle, each flare a ghostly spotlight, revealing the day's horrific aftermath, only to plunge it back into shadow. The air itself was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with the indelible stench of cordite, the pungent residue of countless explosions. This mingled with the metallic, cloying smell of blood, clinging to everything, and the sickening, unforgettable scent of roasted flesh. A macabre perfume of war, a sensory imprint forever seared into memory, rising from the damp earth and cooling debris. Through the long, dark hours, the wounded men cried out. Their voices, raw with pain and despair, echoed across the sand, amplified by the night's deceptive quiet. "Help me. Please help me." Heart-wrenching sounds, carrying on the cool night air, a constant, agonizing reminder of the day's unfinished business, of suffering that continued long after the main battle ceased. You'd lie there, listening, helpless, the sounds piercing any attempt at rest, any hope of forgetting. Survivors, huddled in hastily dug foxholes or behind the meager shelter of the seawall, would chew on hard rations, the taste, like sawdust in your mouth, your throat too tight, too dry, too constricted by terror to swallow properly. Every bite an effort, every swallow a struggle, as your body, though exhausted, remained on high alert, nerves stretched taut. The water, too, offered little comfort, tasting of earth and metal. Offshore, a vast, silent armada still waited. 6,000 ships, a colossal testament to Allied might, lay in the darkness, ready to feed more men, more supplies, more engines of war into the furnace of Normandy. Their distant silhouettes against the horizon were a powerful, sobering sight, a promise of reinforcement, but also a stark reminder that the fight was far from over. No one said it aloud. No one dared to voice the words. But everyone knew. With chilling certainty, tomorrow would be worse. The thought settled deep in your mind, a cold, unwavering truth. The night, rather than offering solace, became another torment, a long, agonizing wait for the inevitable dawn, for the next round of unimaginable terror. The distant sounds of the sea, once calming, now held a mournful, heavy cadence, a constant reminder of the profound cost of this enterprise. The sun, eventually, would rise again, casting long, weary shadows across the ravaged landscape. But for those who lived through it, the longest day would never truly end. When the final tallies were whispered, the numbers were staggering: approximately 10,000 Allied casualties, men killed, wounded, or missing. On the German side, an estimated 6,000 dead. These weren't just statistics. They were lives, each a universe of memories, dreams, and futures extinguished on the beaches and fields of Normandy. Historians, from the comfortable distance of time, would later call it liberation, a turning point in the war, a triumph of strategy and courage. But for the soldiers who were there, who crawled through the freezing surf and faced the relentless fire, it was chaos. A brutal, unforgiving, and often senseless maelstrom of death and survival. The words of the historians, though true in their own way, could never fully capture the visceral, terrifying reality of those moments. Survivors, those who somehow made it through the impossible, would carry only fragments of memory, etched deep into their souls. The piercing, desperate screams of men, the metallic taste of blood in the air, the constant, echoing, agonizing cry of "medic." These were the souvenirs they brought back, more potent and lasting than any medal. These memories would live with them, a silent, internal battlefield, long after the physical wounds had healed. One veteran, years later, attempting to articulate the profound, contradictory nature of the experience, put it simply, yet profoundly: "I wouldn't trade the experience for $1 million, but I wouldn't go through it again for $1 million either." A testament to the transformative power of such a day. The way it forged and scarred, taught and terrified, all at once. The value of having been there, of having survived, was immense. But the price, the cost to one's spirit and peace of mind, was incalculable. Normandy, in the end, would leave scars that never truly healed, etched not just into the landscape, with its still visible bunkers and war-torn fields, but into the very fabric of those who witnessed it. Scars in the sound of a distant thunder that might evoke the roar of shells, in the smell of damp earth that could recall the odor of graves, and in the recurring nightmares that haunted their sleep. For history, it was a pivotal victory, the beginning of the end of a terrible war. But for those who were actually there, who felt the sand beneath their boots and the cold fear in their hearts, it was simply hell on sand. And as you reflect on this journey, this terrible, beautiful story, you feel the weight of their sacrifice, a quiet hum in the echoes of time, a story whispered by the wind over the beaches, forever reminding us of the day the world changed. On the quiet, pre-dawn hours of June 6, 1944, a vast and silent armada began its inexorable approach towards the unsuspecting shores of Normandy. Imagine, if you will, the cool, damp air clinging to the thousands of Allied ships and landing craft. A silent procession stretching for miles across the restless waters of the English Channel. Above, a ceaseless murmur of engines, as thousands of aircraft, like a swarm of unseen locusts, began their own precise ballet across the star-dusted sky, their navigation lights mere pinpricks against the vast expanse of the firmament. This was not merely an invasion. It was an orchestration of unprecedented scale. moving with a chilling, almost spectral quietude towards a coast still slumbering in the false security of night. On the German side, along the very beaches that would soon bear witness to such a monumental conflict, the defenses, though present, were tragically thin. A pervasive, almost hypnotic belief had taken root within the German high command, a stubborn conviction that no attack of such magnitude could possibly come here, to these particular stretches of coastline. They believed, with a certainty born of strategic assumption and perhaps a touch of weary complacency, that the true blow would fall elsewhere, further north, across the narrowest point of the Channel, at Pas de Calais. This deeply held, yet tragically misguided assumption meant that the men stationed along the Normandy coast were often a mix of less experienced soldiers, older troops, or those recovering from wounds, their numbers woefully inadequate for the storm that was about to break. They watched the horizon, perhaps feeling the slight chill of the morning air, oblivious to the immense, silent power bearing down upon them. As the first faint hues of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, a different kind of light, stark and terrifying, illuminated the coastal landscape. The colossal thunder of naval bombardments erupted, a symphony of destruction that tore through the pre-dawn quiet, shaking the very earth beneath the feet of the bewildered German coastal guards. Shells, some as large as small cars, screamed through the air, their descent marked by a terrifying whistle, before detonating with a force that could level concrete bunkers and splinter ancient trees. The air filled with the acrid smell of high explosives and pulverized earth, a scent that would forever be etched into the memory of those who survived. These guards, who moments before had been staring out into the peaceful dark, found themselves overwhelmed, their communication lines severed, their positions shattered, their world utterly consumed by fire and noise. It was a baptism of fire that few could have anticipated. Fewer still could withstand. Then, as the smoke began to clear and the thunder receded into a menacing growl, the first waves of Allied troops stormed the sands. They emerged from the landing craft like phantoms, silhouetted against the burgeoning light, their shouts echoing above the roar of the surf and the crackle of small arms fire. Their sheer numbers were staggering, a relentless tide of humanity pressing forward. This forced the German defenders into a desperate, often futile, struggle for survival, a last-ditch effort to hold ground against an unstoppable force. Many, isolated and cut off, fought with courage born of desperation. But their efforts, though valiant, were akin to trying to stem an ocean tide with a wicker basket. The battle on the beaches was brutal, a chaotic crucible of human will against overwhelming might. And for Germany, it was the beginning of the end. Normandy, therefore, was not merely another landing site on a war-torn map. It was the crucible, the undeniable turning point of the war in the West. It was the moment when the strategic balance irrevocably shifted, when the tide, held back for so long, finally broke through with an unstoppable force. The echoes of that morning, the silent approach, the thunderous awakening, and the desperate, valiant, yet ultimately insufficient defense, resonate through history as a testament to both the overwhelming power of a united front and the tragic consequences of strategic misjudgment. And as the sun finally climbed above the horizon that fateful day, it illuminated a landscape forever changed, marking the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. To understand the profound strategic misstep that left Normandy so vulnerable, we must delve into the mind of Adolf Hitler himself, a mind often swayed by intuition and conviction rather than the cold, hard facts presented by his generals. Hitler was consumed by a fervent, almost unshakable belief that the Allied invasion, when it finally came, would strike at Pas-de-Calais. This conviction was not born of mere conjecture. It was rooted in a logical, albeit ultimately flawed, assessment. Calais, after all, was the narrowest point of the English Channel, a mere 21 miles separating the British coast from mainland Europe. It offered the shortest sea route, seemingly the most direct path for an invading force, and thus, in Hitler's estimation, the most obvious target. He clung to this idea with a stubbornness that would prove catastrophic, weaving it into the very fabric of German defensive planning. And in doing so, constructing a phantom shield that left the true target exposed. While many of his experienced commanders, seasoned men who understood the complex realities of large-scale invasions, harbored significant doubts about this absolute certainty, they dared not openly challenge the Führer. The political climate within the Third Reich was one of fear and absolute obedience, where dissent was not merely discouraged, but actively suppressed, often with brutal consequences. To question Hitler was to risk not only one's career, but often one's life. So, instead of direct confrontation, their doubts were expressed in hushed tones amongst themselves, in subtle diplomatic maneuvers within the general staff, or, more often, remained unspoken, trapped behind the grim visages of men who saw the looming catastrophe, but were powerless to prevent it. This atmosphere of stifled dissent meant that the crucial strategic arguments against Hitler's Calais obsession never gained the traction they desperately needed, leaving a vacuum where critical analysis should have been. As a direct consequence of Hitler's unwavering conviction, the bulk of Germany's precious strategic reserves, including many of its formidable panzer divisions, were meticulously concentrated away from Normandy, specifically in the Calais region and the areas surrounding it. These were the elite armored formations, the mechanized spearheads that had swept across Europe in the early years of the war, and their absence from the actual landing zones was a gift of immeasurable value to the Allies. Imagine, if you will, powerful tanks, their engines ready, their crews on high alert, waiting day after day for an attack that would never materialize, while just a few hundred miles to the west, the real invasion was gathering its strength, unseen and unimpeded by their presence. This misallocation of vital resources was a self-inflicted wound, bleeding Germany's strength precisely where it was most needed. Furthermore, a pervasive sentiment had taken root in the strategic circles of Berlin, many, echoing Hitler's own belief, simply thought that an invasion of the scale of D-Day, particularly in a region like Normandy, was an impossibility. They had analyzed the terrain, the logistical challenges, the sheer audacity required to launch such an operation, and concluded that it was simply too grand, too complex, too improbable to truly succeed. This collective misbelief, this confident dismissal of the improbable as impossible, acted as a psychological barrier, preventing serious preparations and robust defenses from being established in the very place where they would be most desperately required. It created a blind spot, an unexamined vulnerability that the Allies, with their meticulous planning and audacious courage, were poised to exploit with devastating effectiveness. And so, this profound misbelief, this stubborn adherence to a phantom threat at Calais, left the Normandy beaches critically underdefended when it mattered most. The elaborate concrete bunkers stood largely empty of the elite troops and heavy weaponry needed to repel a determined assault. The men who manned these defenses were often stretched thin, lacking the experience, the morale, and the overwhelming firepower necessary to confront the full might of the Allied invasion. The ghost of Calais, conjured by Hitler's unwavering certainty and nourished by the fear of dissent, effectively drew a strategic curtain across the true stage of battle, ensuring that when the curtain finally rose on June 6th, Germany would be caught in a state of profound and ultimately fatal unpreparedness. The echoes of that misplaced conviction would reverberate for years, a chilling reminder of how a single, powerful illusion can unravel the fate of an empire. The dawn of June 6th, 1944, a day that would forever alter the course of human history, found Adolf Hitler in an entirely unexpected and catastrophically ill-timed state asleep. While the largest amphibious invasion ever conceived roared to life across the English Channel, while thousands of Allied ships disgorged their human cargo onto the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy, while the very fate of his empire hung precariously in the balance, the Führer was still ensconced in his private chambers, undisturbed by the unfolding catastrophe. He slept late, perhaps exhausted by the burdens of command, or perhaps simply adhering to his irregular nocturnal schedule, utterly oblivious to the hurricane that was gathering momentum a few hundred miles to the west. This simple act, this extended slumber, would cascade into a series of delays that would seal Germany's fate on that critical day. In the meticulously hierarchical and suffocatingly centralized command structure of the Third Reich, no one, not a single general, however experienced or high-ranking, dared to deploy the powerful panzer divisions without Hitler's direct, explicit approval. These armored spearheads, the mobile reserves that were strategically placed to repel any major invasion, sat idle, their engines cold, their crews anxious, awaiting a direct order from the man who was still lost in the quiet embrace of sleep. Imagine the agonizing tension in the German command center's reports of landings, initially confusing, then increasingly undeniable, flooding in from the coast. The frantic phone calls, the whispered debates, the gnawing anxiety among officers who understood the gravity of the situation, yet were shackled by the rigid protocols of their dictator's command. Every passing minute, every hour of Hitler's unconsciousness was a precious, irreplaceable window of opportunity slamming shut for the German defenders. When Hitler finally awoke, sometime around noon, the initial reports of the landings were dismissed with an almost dismissive wave of the hand. He clung stubbornly to his established conviction, the phantom shield of Calais still blinding him to the true reality. He insisted, with an almost childlike obstinacy, that the Normandy landings were nothing more than a diversion, a clever feint designed to draw German reserves away from the real invasion he still believed was destined for Pas de Calais. He saw only what he wanted to see, interpreting the overwhelming evidence through the distorted lens of his own preconceived notions. This profound misjudgment, born of hubris and a terrifying isolation from reality, meant that even once roused, his reaction was one of denial, not decisive action. Consequently, the vital panzer counterattacks, which represented Germany's best, perhaps only, chance to push the Allied forces back into the sea before they could consolidate their beachheads, were delayed until the afternoon. The orders, when they finally came, were hesitant, fragmented, and late. The mighty armored divisions that should have been rolling towards the beaches in the early morning hours, striking at the most vulnerable moments of the Allied landing, were instead ordered to move in the bright light of day, many hours after the initial assault. This delay was not merely a matter of inconvenience. It was a strategic death knell. Every hour of daylight gave the Allies more time to establish their positions, to bring more troops and equipment ashore, to fortify their precarious toeholds. By the time the crucial armored formations finally began to rumble towards the embattled coast, the vital window to repel the Allies had already closed. The chaos of the initial landings had been absorbed. The beachheads were more secure, and the overwhelming Allied air superiority was fully operational. The opportunity to catch the invaders at their most vulnerable point, to launch a swift, decisive counterblow, had slipped away like sand through an open hand, lost to the dictator's slumber and his subsequent stubborn denial. The quiet hours of that morning, filled with the desperate pleas of commanders and the silent roar of an unfolding invasion, became a monument to strategic paralysis, a haunting testament to how a single individual's personal habits and ingrained convictions could so tragically determine the fate of millions and the course of a world war. Within the German High Command, even amongst the most respected and battle-hardened generals, there festered a deep and debilitating strategic disagreement, particularly concerning the deployment of their precious armored reserves in the face of an anticipated Allied invasion. This division of thought, a quiet but persistent undercurrent of discord, found its most prominent manifestation in the clashing philosophies of two of Germany's most distinguished field marshals, Erwin Rommel and Gerd von Rundstedt. Their differing views on how to counter the inevitable invasion created a paralysis at the top, a subtle but insidious weakening of Germany's defensive posture along the Atlantic Wall. Field Marshal Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, renowned for his audacious, rapid movements and his deep understanding of offensive warfare, paradoxically argued for a decisive defensive strategy in this context. His experience in North Africa, where Allied air power had proven devastating, convinced him that any invasion must be crushed immediately, at the very edge of the beaches. He believed that the overwhelming air superiority the Allies would undoubtedly command meant that any German armored reserves held inland would be decimated en route to the front lines, rendering them ineffective. His vision was clear: meet the invaders head-on, with every available tank and soldier in a furious, concentrated battle on the sands themselves, before they could establish a secure foothold. He saw the ocean as both a barrier and a trap, and believed the battle must be fought and won there. In stark contrast, Field Marshal Rundstedt, the elder statesman of the German military, a more traditional and cautious strategist, advocated for an entirely different approach. He desired to keep the armored reserves, particularly the formidable panzer divisions, held back, concentrated inland, far enough from the coast to avoid immediate destruction by naval bombardment or aerial assault. His plan envisioned these reserves being unleashed only after the main Allied landing force had been identified, allowing for a decisive, concentrated counterblow against the established beachhead. He sought to create a powerful, mobile fist that could strike with overwhelming force at a chosen moment, rather than dissipating their strength in a chaotic, piecemeal defense on the beaches. His was a strategy of patience and overwhelming force, but it carried the inherent risk of allowing the enemy to gain crucial ground. These fundamental disagreements, a quiet battle of wills and strategic philosophies, dragged on for months, creating an almost imperceptible, yet profoundly damaging, state of indecision and paralysis within the German leadership. Meetings were held, arguments presented, but no clear, unified resolution ever emerged. The endless debates, the inability to forge a cohesive strategy from these two diametrically opposed viewpoints, meant that vital time was wasted, and critical defensive preparations remained mired in a bureaucratic limbo. Imagine the frustration of junior officers, receiving conflicting directives or feeling the weight of uncertainty from their superiors, unable to commit fully to either plan. This period of unresolved strategic tension was a silent erosion of Germany's capacity to react effectively when the moment of truth arrived. In the end, rather than choosing one path decisively, a compromise was reached, a decision that proved to be the worst of both worlds. The powerful panzer divisions, which Rommel believed should be at the beaches and Rundstedt believed should be concentrated inland, were instead split. Some units were deployed forward, too far back to immediately repel an invasion, but too close to escape the initial Allied bombardment and aerial dominance. Others were held back, but not in a truly unified, mobile strike force, often awaiting Hitler's personal approval for their deployment, adding another layer of crippling delay. This fractured deployment fatally weakened both strategies, robbing Germany of the concentrated punch that either Rommel's immediate defense or Rundstedt's decisive counterstrike might have offered. The division at the top, the inability of its most experienced commanders to agree on a unified and coherent plan, inevitably translated into a profound fragility on the battlefield. When the invasion finally came, the German forces were caught between two stools, unable to fully commit to either a strong beach defense or a potent inland counterattack. This internal discord, a quiet but potent poison, ensured that despite their impressive military heritage and the individual bravery of their soldiers, Germany's strategic response to D-Day was fundamentally flawed. A house divided against itself, destined to crumble under the relentless pressure of the Allied assault. It was a silent testament to the insidious power of unresolved conflict at the highest levels of command. As the pivotal dawn of June 6, 1944, broke with the thunderous roar of Allied guns, a key figure in Germany's defensive strategy, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, was conspicuously absent from his command post. In a twist of fate that seems almost tragically ironic in retrospect, Rommel, the very man who championed an immediate, all-out defense at the beaches, was away, traveling inland to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday. It was a personal indulgence, a brief respite from the relentless pressures of command. But its timing could not have been more disastrous. His absence meant that the strong, decisive leadership he advocated, the very urgency he believed was required to repel the invasion, was missing during the critical opening hours, leaving a void that Germany could ill afford. In his stead, in the frantic initial moments of the invasion, General Erich Marx, commander of the German LX-4 Corps, which bore the brunt of the D-Day landings, understood with chilling clarity the absolute necessity of moving the 21st Panzer Division. This formidable armored unit, though not in the immediate vicinity of the landings, represented the most potent mobile reserve available to counter the unfolding assault. Marx, a capable and experienced officer, saw the writing on the wall. Without swift armored intervention, the Allied beachheads would quickly solidify, making any subsequent attempt to dislodge them immensely more difficult, perhaps impossible. The urgency in his requests must have been palpable, almost a desperate plea echoing through the nascent chaos. Yet, even with such a clear and immediate threat, Marx and other commanders were forced to wait, entangled in the notorious layers of German bureaucracy and the crippling need for Hitler's direct approval. The chain of command, designed for order and control, became instead a suffocating blanket of delay. Orders had to be routed through multiple headquarters, each requiring a review, a signature, a confirmation, often with the added impediment of damaged communication lines and the general fog of war. Imagine the frustration, the gnawing sense of helplessness, as precious minutes, then hours, ticked by. The sounds of battle grew louder, the reports of Allied advances more dire, while the powerful tanks sat largely idle, their potential to turn the tide slowly ebbing away with each passing moment of administrative inertia. The entire morning, a period of absolutely critical vulnerability for the Allied forces, was tragically lost to these delays and the deepening confusion. Those crucial hours, when the invaders were still precarious on the beaches, under-equipped and exposed, represented Germany's singular chance to launch a truly decisive counterattack. But that window, wide open in the pre-dawn darkness, slowly, inexorably, began to close. The opportunity to push the Allied forces back into the choppy waters of the Channel, to achieve the decisive victory that Rommel had so desperately envisioned, evaporated with each unanswered query, each delayed directive, each moment spent waiting for a Führer who was either asleep or in denial. The silence of the command centers, punctuated by the frantic ringing of phones, stood in stark contrast to the escalating roar on the distant beaches. When the panzers finally did receive approval and began to move, it was too late. The early morning advantage was gone. Now, under the bright, unforgiving sun of a summer day, their movements were immediately detected and subjected to relentless, heavy air attacks from the now dominant Allied air forces. What should have been a swift, devastating counterblow became a slow, grinding advance under a hail of bombs and strafing runs. Roads became clogged with burning vehicles, formations were scattered, and valuable time and resources were squandered simply trying to reach the battlefront. The very force that was meant to be Germany's salvation was instead transformed into a target, a stark illustration of how strategic delay, even more than tactical miscalculation, can irrevocably seal the fate of a military campaign. The echoes of those lost morning hours would haunt the German High Command for the remainder of the war. As the full scope of the D-Day invasion became horrifyingly clear, the German command structure found itself plunged into an almost impenetrable fog of war. Reports from the embattled front lines were a chaotic torrent, a deluge of information that contradicted itself, painted wildly different pictures of the situation, and utterly clouded any hope of clear, decisive strategic assessment. One report might speak of fierce resistance and holding actions, while another, from a mere few miles away, would describe overwhelming Allied breakthroughs and catastrophic losses. This cacophony of conflicting intelligence made it incredibly difficult, almost impossible, to piece together an accurate, cohesive understanding of the unfolding battle, let alone formulate an effective response. The airwaves were thick with static and confusion, the voices of desperate men often lost amidst the general chaos, further deepening the sense of disarray. Adding to this perilous uncertainty, some commanders, perhaps clinging to a desperate hope, or perhaps swayed by the initial, fragmented reports of successful local defenses, actually believed that the Germans were winning, or at least holding their own decisively. This dangerous optimism, fueled by misinformation and wishful thinking, was a profound misreading of the situation. It created a false sense of security, a dangerous illusion that the crisis was manageable, or even that the Allied landings were being successfully contained. This belief, tragically misplaced, meant that the true urgency of the situation was diminished in the minds of some decision-makers, further exacerbating the delays and the general lack of coordinated response. They were fighting a phantom war in their minds, while the real battle was slipping away. Consequently, In an environment of such profound uncertainty and misplaced confidence, key decisions were slow, hesitant, or, perhaps most dangerously, entirely misdirected. Commanders, unsure of the true extent of the Allied penetration, wary of committing reserves to what might be a secondary effort, or simply waiting for clearer orders that never came, often reacted with a paralyzing indecision. Precious units were held back, or worse, sent to reinforce areas that were not the primary threat, leaving other critical sectors vulnerable. This hesitation, a natural byproduct of the pervasive confusion, meant that the German response was piecemeal, fragmented, and never delivered with the concentrated force that might have turned the tide. Each hour of inaction was a gift to the Allies, a chance to solidify their fragile beachheads and pour more men and materiel onto the continent. In the midst of this strategic paralysis, frontline units, the brave but often ill-equipped soldiers directly facing the onslaught, were left unsupported in the critical early hours of the invasion. Imagine these men, dug into their positions, watching wave after wave of Allied troops surge onto the beaches, their ammunition dwindling, their numbers thinning, and their desperate calls for reinforcements echoing into a void. The promised air support, the powerful armored counterattacks, the coordinated artillery barrages, these either never materialized or arrived too late to make a difference. This feeling of abandonment, of fighting alone against an overwhelming tide, undoubtedly crushed morale and hastened the collapse of many defensive positions. They were pawns in a larger, chaotic game, left to fend for themselves as the grand strategy faltered. Ultimately, this profound chaos, this thick, disorienting fog of conflicting orders and false reports, robbed Germany of its only real chance to push the Allies back into the sea. The opportunity to meet the invaders at their most vulnerable, to deliver a decisive, coordinated counterblow, was squandered in a maelstrom of confusion and indecision. The critical hours of that morning, when the fate of Europe hung in the balance, were lost not just to a dictator's slumber, but to a systemic failure of command and control, a breakdown in communication and a fatal inability to grasp the true, terrifying reality of the unfolding invasion. The echoes of that chaotic day would linger, a haunting reminder of how easily a powerful military can be undone, not just by external force, but by internal disarray. By 1944, the once invincible German war machine was showing undeniable signs of strain. Its formidable strength stretched perilously thin across vast and unforgiving fronts. A stark reality for the defenders of Normandy was that Germany's elite soldiers, its most experienced, most hardened veterans, were locked in the brutal, grinding meat grinder of the Eastern Front. Here, on the boundless plains of Russia, a relentless and unforgiving war of attrition had consumed millions of lives and vast quantities of materiel. The battles against the Soviet Union were fought with a ferocity and a scale almost incomprehensible to the Western mind, demanding the absolute best of Germany's military might. This existential struggle meant that the Reich's most capable fighting men, the very backbone of its army, were bleeding out in the freezing mud and scorching dust of a distant land, far from the beaches of France. This left the unenviable task of defending the critical Atlantic coastline, including the vital Normandy sector, to a very different class of soldier. The Normandy defenders were largely comprised of second-rate Wehrmacht troops, men who were either older, less trained, recovering from wounds, or those deemed less critical for the Eastern Front. Alongside them stood a significant number of forced conscripts from Eastern European nations. men who had been pressed into service from territories conquered by the Reich. These were not zealous ideologues or hardened veterans. They were often reluctant warriors, speaking different languages, nursing grudges against their German overlords, and lacking the fervent belief in the cause that characterized the early Wehrmacht. Their morale was inherently fragile, their loyalty often questioned, and their fighting spirit a far cry from the elite divisions bleeding out in the east. Furthermore, the equipment available to these defenders was often outdated. A motley collection of older models, captured foreign weaponry, and whatever could be scraped together from dwindling arsenals. Their heavy tanks, if present, were often older Panzer IIIs and IVs, no match for the formidable Allied Shermans and Churchills. Their anti-tank weapons were sometimes inadequate, their artillery pieces less numerous and less modern. Ammunition, a critical lifeblood of any fighting force, was often scarce, carefully rationed, and sometimes of questionable quality. Imagine a soldier facing down an overwhelming invasion, knowing that his rifle is an antique, his grenades few, and his anti-tank rounds might not even penetrate the enemy's armor. This pervasive lack of modern, abundant equipment further eroded their confidence and their ability to mount an effective defense. Unsurprisingly, against this backdrop of depleted manpower, inferior equipment, and often forced service, morale among the Normandy defenders was dismally low. They faced an enemy that was not only well prepared, meticulously trained, and equipped with the very best of modern weaponry, but also imbued with a fierce determination born of years of anticipation and a clear sense of purpose. The Allied forces arrived with the full weight of their combined industrial might, their spirits high, their objectives clear. The contrast with the weary, often resentful, and poorly supplied German defenders could not have been more stark. This profound disparity in morale, in the very will to fight, was a silent but incredibly powerful weapon in the Allied arsenal, subtly eroding the German defenses even before the first shot was fired. Thus, the defenses on the beaches of Normandy, often presented as an impregnable Atlantic wall, were, in reality, weak from the very start. The concrete bunkers and formidable obstacles belied the human and material deficiencies behind them. The formidable image of a unified, unyielding defense was largely a facade, masking an underlying fragility and exhaustion. These were not the men or the resources capable of repelling the largest amphibious invasion in history. They were the forgotten, the second tier, the conscripted, left to face an overwhelming tide with dwindling hope and insufficient means. The echoes of their lonely vigil and their desperate, often futile, resistance whisper through the sands of Normandy, a poignant reminder of an empire stretching its resources beyond the breaking point. While German commanders grappled with internal divisions and a dictator's fixed ideas, the Allies were executing one of the most brilliant and elaborate deception operations in military history. Operation Fortitude. This was not merely a tactical feint. It was a grand strategic illusion, designed to play directly into Hitler's preconceived notions and thus paralyze Germany's ability to react effectively to the real invasion. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a subtle weaving of fact and fiction that would ultimately determine the success of D-Day. At the heart of Operation Fortitude was the creation of a sophisticated phantom army in southeast England, directly across from Pas-de-Calais. Imagine, if you will, vast staging areas filled not with real tanks, but with meticulously crafted inflatable rubber replicas, designed to look utterly convincing from aerial reconnaissance. Alongside these rubber giants stood wooden aircraft, parked on cleverly constructed fake airfields, complete with painted runways and convincing decoy hangars. Even the barracks were populated with a skeleton crew of real soldiers, performing realistic maneuvers, creating the illusion of a massive, heavily armed force poised for invasion. This phantom 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly commanded by the highly respected and feared General George S. Patton, was an elaborate stage set, a theatrical masterpiece designed to command the enemy's full attention, drawing their gaze away from the true target. The illusion was further reinforced by a relentless stream of fabricated radio traffic. Allied intelligence meticulously mimicked the unique communication patterns of a large army group, generating a constant, bustling flow of coded messages, supply requests, and troop movement reports, all pointing towards Calais as the imminent invasion site. These signals, carefully crafted to be intercepted and deciphered by German intelligence, created an auditory phantom, a constant hum of military activity that resonated with the expectations of the German High Command. Every false report, every coded message, was a subtle brushstroke in the masterpiece of deception, subtly reinforcing the narrative that the true threat lay elsewhere. It was a symphony of lies, composed for German ears. Perhaps most chillingly effective were the double agents, spies who, while ostensibly working for Germany, were in reality under Allied control. These carefully cultivated agents fed Berlin a steady diet of lies, tailored precisely to Hitler's expectations and existing biases. They confirmed the intelligence that FUSAG was real, that Patton was indeed its commander, and that Calais was the most logical, and therefore inevitable, target. These agents were particularly potent because they reinforced what Hitler already wanted to believe. Playing upon his stubborn certainty, they were not merely passing information, they were subtly manipulating the very perception of reality within the German High Command, acting as quiet saboteurs within the enemy's most secure intelligence circles. Their whispers, seemingly from within, solidified the grand deception. Through this intricate web of physical props, fabricated communications, and manipulated intelligence, Hitler became absolutely certain that Calais was the true, and only, invasion point. His conviction, already strong, was now bolstered by what he believed was undeniable evidence from his own intelligence channels. This profound belief, nurtured and reinforced by Allied ingenuity, became an impenetrable psychological barrier. It made him deaf to any counter-arguments, blind to any dissenting evidence, and utterly convinced that Normandy was, at best, a clever diversion. He was trapped in a self-constructed prison of his own expectations, with the Allies holding the key. And so, as the real invasion hammered against the shores of Normandy, this elaborate deception held vast German reserves in the wrong place. The powerful panzer divisions and crack infantry units, so desperately needed to repel the actual assault, remained poised and ready in the Calais region, waiting for an invasion that would never come. While the real battle raged, while the coastline of Normandy burned and bled, these formidable forces sat idle, watching a phantom army, their potential wasted, their power neutralized by a web of brilliant lies. Operation Fortitude stands as a testament to the power of human ingenuity, a silent, almost invisible, but ultimately decisive factor in the success of D-Day, ensuring that Germany's might remained pointed at a ghost, while the real enemy slipped through the mist. Beyond the strategic blunders and the brilliant deception, Germany's failure at Normandy was also irrevocably sealed by the sheer, overwhelming material and logistical overmatch of the Allied forces. By 1944, the Western Allies had achieved a level of industrial output and military integration that the Third Reich, despite its early successes, simply could not contend with. This was a battle not just of men and machines, but of an entire system of production, supply, and technological superiority, all concentrated with chilling effectiveness against a single, critical front. The Allies, through years of meticulous planning and an unprecedented coordination of resources, managed to concentrate overwhelming firepower on a single front. Imagine the vast factories of the United States and Great Britain, churning out tanks, planes, ships, and ammunition at an unimaginable rate. This industrial might translate it into an endless stream of supplies, a constant flow of men and materiel that could sustain an invasion of this magnitude. When they landed at Normandy, they brought with them not just initial assault waves, but the promise of continuous reinforcement, a relentless hammer blow designed to break through any defense. This concentration of force on a relatively narrow front meant that local German defenders, however brave, were always facing an exponentially larger, better-equipped enemy, a relentless tide that seemed to surge unendingly from the sea. In stark contrast, Germany was stretched perilously thin, its once formidable military machine now tasked with defending an immense and vulnerable empire. From the icy fjords of Norway to the sun-baked deserts of North Africa, though now largely lost, and crucially, across 2,000 miles of Western European coastline, German forces were dispersed, often in inadequate numbers, to guard against threats, both real and imagined. Every division sent to defend the Atlantic Wall was one less available for the Eastern Front, where the bulk of Germany's military was still locked in a death struggle against the Soviet Union. This impossible juggling act meant that no single front could receive the full, concentrated strength it needed, leaving every sector vulnerable to a sufficiently powerful assault. The vastness of their commitments became their undoing, a testament to the unsustainable nature of their ambitions. Adding to Germany's strategic woes was the tragic decline of its once feared air force, the Luftwaffe, and its proud navy, the Kriegsmarine. By 1944, both services were mere shadows of their former selves, battered and depleted by years of relentless combat, the bombing of their industrial centers, and the sheer numerical superiority of the Allies. The once dominant Luftwaffe, which had terrorized the skies of Europe in the early war years, was now struggling to put even a handful of fighters into the air on D-Day, utterly unable to challenge the vast aerial armada of the Allies. Similarly, the Kriegsmarine, devastated by losses in the Atlantic, could offer little more than token resistance to the immense Allied naval forces. This meant that the Allies held total, undisputed control of the skies and the seas over the invasion area. Above, the sky belonged to Allied fighter planes, providing vital close air support, bombing German positions, and relentlessly strafing any German movement. On the waters, the colossal Allied fleet not only delivered the invasion force, but also provided an unceasing, devastating naval bombardment, silencing German batteries and pounding their defensive positions. This complete dominance meant that the German infantry, the soldiers fighting on the ground, were left to fight alone, without the crucial support they desperately needed from their own air and naval forces. Every troop movement was vulnerable, every communication exposed, every defensive position a potential target from above and from the sea. The German infantry, the very men who bore the brunt of the invasion, found themselves in an impossible position. They fought with immense courage, often to the last man. But they fought a solitary battle against an enemy that possessed not only superior numbers and equipment, but also the complete tactical advantage of air and sea supremacy. There were no dive bombers to harass the Allied landings, no naval guns to shell their ships, no friendly fighters to protect them from strafing runs. The skies were empty of their own, and the seas were swarming with the enemy. This profound imbalance, this overwhelming Allied overmatch in every domain, crushed any hope of German success, turning their desperate defense into a prolonged, inevitable retreat. The echoes of that unequal struggle speak of an empire facing a force it could no longer hope to resist. By the momentous year of 1944, the grand, terrifying edifice of the Third Reich was not merely faltering. It was exhausted, crumbling from within and teetering on the brink of total collapse. The sheer weight of its own megalomaniacal ambitions, coupled with years of relentless, global warfare, had brought the once powerful empire to its knees. D-Day, for all its immediate impact, was not merely a defeat. It was the decisive, final blow to an entity already mortally wounded, a desperate lunge by a dying beast. The economy of Germany, once meticulously organized for war, was now breaking down under the immense strain. Years of diverting all resources towards military production had left civilian life devastated. And the constant attrition of resources meant that even the war machine itself was beginning to seize up. Supply lines, stretching across vast, hostile territories, were under constant attack, severed by partisan activity and Allied bombing. Fuel, rubber, strategic metals, all were in increasingly short supply, severely impacting Germany's ability to move its troops, produce new armaments, and sustain its war effort. The once efficient logistical networks were snarled, overwhelmed, and slowly disintegrating, creating bottlenecks and shortages that crippled any attempt at a coherent response. The very infrastructure that had fueled their early conquests was now groaning under the unbearable pressure. The German army, the Wehrmacht, once the envy of the world, was a shadow of its former self. Weakened beyond measure by catastrophic losses on the Eastern Front. The brutal, unforgiving campaigns against the Soviet Union had consumed millions of its best soldiers, from elite panzer crews to seasoned infantrymen. These were not merely numerical losses. They were a drain on experience, leadership, and morale that could never be fully replaced. The pool of available manpower was dwindling, forcing Germany to rely on older men, younger boys, and unwilling conscripts, a stark contrast to the youthful, highly trained armies of the early war years. The constant bloodletting in the East had created an unhealable wound, leaving Germany critically vulnerable on every other front, a fact the Allies were acutely aware of when planning Normandy. Adding to this internal decay, German cities burned daily under the relentless onslaught of Allied bombers. From the industrial heartland of the Ruhr to the historic centers of Berlin, Hamburg, and Dresden, night after night, waves of Allied aircraft delivered tons of high explosives and incendiary devices. The constant drone of bombers, the wail of air raid sirens, the terrifying whistle of falling bombs, and the acrid smell of smoke became a dreadful, omnipresent reality for the German populace. This sustained aerial bombardment not only destroyed industrial capacity and infrastructure, but also utterly shattered civilian morale, creating a pervasive sense of dread and hopelessness. The home front, once a source of unwavering support, was cracking under the immense psychological and physical pressure, further weakening the foundations of the Reich. Against this backdrop of economic collapse, a depleted army, and a crumbling home front. Normandy was not just another defeat on a long list of setbacks. It was the final, devastating blow to a dying empire. It shattered any remaining illusion of German invincibility in the West, irrevocably opened a second major front in Europe, and denied the Reich any hope of shifting forces back to the east to stem the Soviet tide. The landings confirmed that Germany was now fighting a two-front war of unimaginable scale, with dwindling resources against an enemy whose power seemed boundless. As the echoes of the D-Day invasion faded into the broader symphony of the war, they left behind not just the physical scars on the beaches, but a profound sense of an empire's final moments. Normandy was the moment the patient coded, the point of no return. It cemented the fate of a regime that had stretched itself too thin, fought too many battles, and made too many enemies. And as the sun set on that fateful June day, it cast long, cold shadows not just over the beaches of France, but over the final, tragic chapter of the Third Reich, whispering of an end that was now inevitable, a story quietly concluding in the annals of history.